Good morning from our vantage point. It is Thursday, April 13th. I'm with John Perretti and David Twinn. David and John had a prior episode alone and another episode with Anthony back in early March. And our discussions have continued. I've known John for close to 30 years, I believe, and I've known David now for about 3 or 4 years. And I knew David prior to that in our community here. But the two of them have some very common bonds that they're beginning to discover as they share their stories and their ideas about who they became and what they thought about who they became. And I want to introduce them again to discuss what they have seen and understand in relation to the mental obsession and this seeming internal dialogue that seems to block us and seems to attack us and seems to intrude on us, or have thoughts intrude on us as though thoughts have a life of their own and can even do that, and start to look at it from that point of view. David and I talked this morning a little bit about the difference between understanding. Understanding and reason is a thought process. So I can't understand my way into knowing, because knowing isn't a thought process, but knowing in absolute terms. Knowing knows it knows. It doesn't know itself because it doesn't think of itself. It simply knows what it knows. So if knowing knows and awareness is awareness, then we all know we know, and we're aware in our essence. And thoughts are designed to express that knowingness and that awareness, to express it. And we talked about the fact that we tend to struggle with any insight we get in relation to this when it comes to talking to other people. Because my practice has been largely developing stories that I can convince people, justify all my frailties and all my shortcomings and all my faults and all my defects, so I can excuse myself as though I have no responsibility for those things. And if my stories have been developed in such a way that I feel I'm a master of the story, then I have mastered the denial of reality and truth, when in fact reality and truth can never be denied. It's impossible to deny something. It's absolute. I can think it's blocked and I can think it's denied, because thinking, when I think of it as an absolute state of being, isn't true, because thinking is always changing. I changed microphones. I might have missed that. Thinking is always changing. Anything that's always changing is only absolute when you see it in total. And what that means is that everything changing never changes in relation to the fact that it's always changing, which is an interesting phenomenon. If you look at things in total, you start seeing them as absolute. When you look at them as bits and pieces, they seem to be relative. They seem to only function in relation to other things. So the absolute nature of the absolute would suggest that everything, even things that seem relative, are also absolute. We're just functioning in a dynamic or a realm that is more about becoming in terms of human things than about being. But being is the essence of our existence. Being is the presence of our presence. Being is the absolute state of our knowing and awareness. So that's my launch pad.
So, David, I have a question for you.
Good morning, guys.
Good morning, Jack. David. I wrote this down. How much effort did it take for you to maintain you?
Oh man, I mean, that's like a dual-edged sword, because one of them was a personality that, that surrounded me, and when people see me coming, but being myself, it doesn't take a lot to be yourself, except for when I'm around other people. When I'm by myself in confinement, I'm a whole different person. But when I'm out in public,
But I mean in public.
Oh shit, that's tiring. I'm gonna be honest. It's very tiring, because, to be honest, it's like seeing weaknesses and seeing certain things in people, and then feeling you're expendable, because I would say it like this: if I was standing next to my brother and someone wanted to fight him, it's like, you're not going to go through that pain. I'm going to go through that, because you can't deal with it. You haven't had a lot. I was telling someone that not too long ago, and they swung on me when I told them. I said, "You're not that type of person," but they tried to prove it. But it was just like I didn't want to prove it back, because it's like there's a lot of. Only word keeps popping in my head is ownership to those emotions that you can't. It took a lot, like what we were just talking about on who we became. It took a lot to become who I was, but it was a lot of pain. It wasn't the happiness that helped me become that. It was a lot of the pain, the trauma, and trauma that I caused others and trauma that I received. I remember way back. I remember so much in my childhood, and I don't remember a lot of my adulthood, especially like after getting out of prison. It's been like shit's been flying by, but
Well, let's focus, for me and you, let's focus on puberty.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I just remember being fed up, when I was really young, the thing that I remember is I remember strong family ties. And I don't know what happened. I know there's secrets being kept, but I just remember one night we all got packed up and rushed to the Greyhound bus station, and we went from Lakeview Terrace, when my dad owned a home, to Ohio, where we're all packed in one room and getting treated like, really bad. And we stayed out there for a few years, and then coming back and still living. But it was just like at that point, it's like I started growing because I was hurting, especially, with my father. I was always around my dad. And, so being away from him, it was a mental torture, because I was used to that male being in my life, and I missed him so much when he came. I don't know if I mentioned it before. Like he's like, "Oh, come sleep with me," in the bed, because I started crying. But that night I went to bed, and he looked and asked asked my mom, "Does he piss in the bed?" And she's like, "No, he doesn't." And I had to be about 8 years old at the time, 8 or 9, and going through those types of struggles and stuff, and then going where I moved to Ohio. Oh my God, you would never think that a grown man to have a racist thought toward a young boy, and to where and I faced that a few different times, not just Ohio and California and everything, but to see it for real, and then it's just I got fed up, and then that I started protecting myself. Even in the schools out there, I just started swinging on people. And once I seen the fear in people's eyes and the respect I got afterwards, or what I thought was respect, it started shaping who I was.
And what, I understand that. I mean, my father was a monster, so I lived with a Goliath, but so that's how I really, understood violence and how to, treat other people and things. But I was never him. I just tried to become him. If I asked that question that I asked you, how much effort did it take for you to maintain you? For me, it was exhausting.
Yes.
And in a sense, it still is. It's exhausting. And I'm not doing it very well anymore.
Well, you never did it well, which is why it was so tiring.
Thanks, Jack.
Think of the denial it takes to constantly witness the exhaustion and frustration of trying to become who we are, as though becoming something is the ultimate goal, rather than being something that doesn't change is the essence of our already present existence. It's impossible to end up becoming what we already are. That's the impossibility of it. So if you try anything impossible, it's going to be exhausting because it will never work. And no matter how much you work, how hard you try, it's going to be exhausting. It's going to take all your resources. This is exactly, look at addiction in its worst. What happens? Somebody commits their whole life to simply looking for drugs or alcohol. At its worst, people on the street, their whole day is spent basically in an effort of killing themselves, wondering why they need help, wondering, not even thinking they need help, because all they think life is about is figuring out how to deny what's happening, how to be obliterated in their consciousness and in their awareness, how to alter their experience so what they're actually doing doesn't seem like something they have any control over. And we do that to any degree. We try to do something that's impossible. So exhaustion's natural, you know. It's like trying to, you guys were talking about weightlifting. It's like trying to lift 1,000 pounds. You know, you can do it. You're probably going to end up with a bad back. You're never going to get it off the ground. It would take a lot to get that weight off the ground by any human standard. I don't know what the highest, seems to me the highest deadlifts are 600 and some pounds for humans.
No, they're well over 1,000.
Are they? Wow.
Oh,
Yeah.
And you know someone who broke the deadlift record twice, Tom McGee in Gold's Gym.
Yeah. So whatever the threshold is, though, there is a point at which in the sort of natural world that things have limits. And those limits can often be overcome. But if my commitment is constantly trying to overcome limits and not actually concede an unlimited source, I'm constantly battling to prove that I can do the impossible thing, and that gives me the credit I'm finally, and the respect and the admiration and the acknowledgement for finally achieving the thing that I've always had, which is an absolute state of being.
So what I'm, I guess, saying is that I was so uncomfortable with being less than my father that I had to overcompensate and become basically, want to become, the best fighter in the world. And even if it took creating 2 sports to do it, and I still couldn't do it.
Well, the problem is you're trying to be when you already are. My father used to say to me in junior high, don't you want to grow up to be somebody? And I said, how could I if I weren't? And that would sort of take him off the scent for a week or two. He'd have to think about that.
My father would separate you from the fucking ground if you said that to him.
Yeah.
You would end up on the other side of the room.
Well, the point is that if we're trying to be what we already are, it's impossible because we already are. It's like trying to be where we are and thinking we need to go somewhere to get there. It's the same thinking. Think about the idea that many people entertain, that I'll be better when I get somewhere else. I'll be better when I'm with someone else. I'll be better when I have more or less of something else. If it's a problem, I want less of it. If it's some kind of satisfaction, I want more of it. Gratification. It always seems to be not where I am, but somewhere else. Well, if we're always in the present, and I would challenge anybody to consider that whenever they're thinking about anything, including a problem, they're always in the present thinking about it. And whenever they're telling a story, they're always telling a story in the present about something that isn't even happening. And if there's any story to tell, it would be about what's happening. But what's interesting is there's no narrative in the present because everything is speaking for itself by doing what it's doing. The fulfillment of the present is the actuality of everything that's happening, simultaneous to you and all of our existence.
But if you did not create who you were, you would not have survived.
Oh, I protected myself with that new personality. I was always shy and then within myself. And I would notice that, people, how they would treat me. But I would also notice how they would treat me after I went in. I used to call it my hyper state. I'm gonna go hyper on their ass, and it's just like my breathing would change and my whole thought process, and it was just destruction. and I melted people. And when I say that, it's just like, if I was just walking up and I wasn't mad, I don't know how to play fight. I don't know how to do all that shit, but if I went into that state of mind, I just melt through people. They, and they would respect me after that. And I go right back to my little shy self, and then when it happened, then I started knowing me, so I started getting tested. People want to see that monster within inside of me, and I know I held it there, and
they just want to beat it.
Yes, exactly.
Right. So the thing that you think is actually creating your security is actually also creating the insecurity of other monsters looking to be bigger monsters.
Yeah, and that's why I was telling John before, when I walk into a room, I look for me. I look for who he is. The same thing you just said is what I became. I'm looking for the monster to tame. Right. I didn't really want to beat it, but I started wanting to, like me and John are talking right now because we both have that monster inside of us and we see it and we want to tame that, make those flames go down that's inside of us. There's a rage in there sometimes that it's hard to keep inside. But it's just like, at the same token, like where I know it's detrimental to where I stand in life. Like if I don't tame that beast, but it's the same thing like Jack Nicholson said on the stand, you need motherfuckers like me, and like John, because if people didn't have people like us that were around us, they wouldn't be telling some stories that they can tell today as far as saying, I survived this. No, it would have been like, damn, he survived by two daughters and a boy. It'd have been a different story of survival.
Well, and a lot of them didn't survive. By the same token and in the same vein, a lot of them did not survive in your world, David.
True. I've been to so many damn funerals in the last month. I've been to 3. It's very, very tiring to see that happen. Yeah. But this came from the lifestyle. And it's just, it's very real. As much as we want to talk about the thought process around it or whatever, the life is very real. And you'll notice when that flame gets put out, there's not much you can say about it. You know what I mean? But hurt and feel,
Well, it's as real as we make it real, and we use all that pain to justify its reality when in fact it's always subsequent to voluntary thinking about it. The thinking we do about it.
That's an absolute right there. When death comes about it, that's absolute.
Yeah, well, it certainly gives some pause in the whole process to say, oh, this is also possible. Not everybody does seem to be winning this battle. There's the destructive end. We're designed to die naturally, but to die prematurely by our own hand is basically contradicts instinct and survival mechanisms. And if this internal dialogue that we have is actually killing us through anxiety and stress and reactiveness and impulsiveness and compulsiveness, and all of the exhibitions that you're talking about in terms of these actions that you take to prove yourself are all basically creating threats that are there. It's like the old cowboy movie Shane, where the guy said the kid said, you're the fastest draw. And he said, there's always somebody gunning to be faster. Yeah. Always somebody out there saying, you know what, I'm going to beat him. Professional fighters, you see them fight. You know this, John. Guys fight to be number one. And when they get number one, they've got nobody to fight anymore. They're already at the top. What do? They end up losing their position quicker because now the fight's what it always was. It's internal. Mike Tyson losing to Buster Douglas.
That was a wonderful night. I was in Jamaica.
But they gave him no chance and he knocked him out. Why? Whatever Mike was doing, I expect he was in his head about stuff because he was so good. He was so talented, but it ended up becoming him that he was fighting. It wasn't all the other fighters anymore. He had nobody else to beat.
But, as you know, as a sycophant of boxing, and I know, people really discounted, Buster Douglas' ability to keep someone at length.
Clearly.
And he had a wonderful right hand, and he used it perfectly. And, he wanted to win that for his mother, whatever the motivation is. And then he blew up into a diabetic coma at 450 pounds.
Yeah. Well, again, he won. So what happens? You get to the top and you realize it's just a heap. You're at the top of a heap. Okay, now what? So what? Now I've got the enemy that used to, I thought my focus was driven by focusing on a goal, which was just a compulsion and an impulsive nature of distracting myself from the actual problem. And the real problem isn't with all the other people I need to fight and defeat. It's with the idea that who I am is what I think, and I need to conquer that and perfect it, when in fact it's simply a delusion of an illusion that I've made believe is real and true. And there's where the source of the fight is internally for everyone who makes believe their thinking is truth and reality, rather than simply imagined about what's going on. We imagine what's going on. We imagine we know what's going on. We imagine we think we know what's going on. Doesn't mean we know in thinking. It means that those things are already known by being. Those things we think we need to understand already have an understanding of what they are, because they don't have to understand anything, because they know exactly what to do, which is, I would say, is a good bit of evidence in nature. Trees know how to grow. Flies know how to fly. They seem to be very good at proliferating their own species. They don't tend to kill themselves. So we have this capacity to think of ourselves, and as a result, we've used it to undermine our complete capacity to be productive. Not completely. We still seem to thrive in certain respects, but those things that we thrive in, that we try to prove, every one of them has some kind of poisonous, toxic, corrupt consequence that we never seem to want to pay attention to while it's happening. But 30 or 40 years down the road, we start saying, oh, industrial waste being dumped into rivers is not helping the environment. It's not helping the people we claim to be serving with our products that are being poisoned by the water. Those things happen. Consequences are immediate. Whether we accept that or not is a choice. It doesn't mean they're not immediate. It doesn't mean that they're not happening. It means that our own choice about it is very often bent on wanting to continue to prove what we're doing is right, while in fact there's a lot of wrong in what we're doing, because it's all about the bravado of proof and conquering and achieving and looking successful, rather than actually being successful at being to start with. And then the intuitive nature of thinking guides us in ways that we would never think to do. But the benefit of it is broadly beneficial to everyone, not destructive to everyone. Much different platform.
So my father was violent, alcoholic, and fearless, but he was also incredibly entertaining and charismatic. And for me to be seen as weak or spindly or lesser would have meant a death sentence. And therefore, I started to become, in those words, become who I endeavored to be.
Well, he helped you see him in his thoughts about what he became, and insisted by discounting you that you do the same thing in your own way to live up to his expectations. That's all a thought fight, not reality, not truth. It's just our parents, we tend to idolize. We tend to think of them as gods because they are the people that are taking care of us and managing us. And they're not always that thoughtful in the way they do that. And there's not a lot of maturity to look up to as kids and actually see adults who are grown enough to say, look, how you think is not who you are. And proving yourself is not necessary because you've already got an essence that's absolutely, you can't even prove. But when you rely on it, the results are very clear. Same as an adult. If I start relying, there's an adage that the ego requires proof before we act, and spirit provides proof once we act. Meaning, if we rely on it, the proof is in the application. 2 + 2 is 4. It works every time. I don't need to rethink math every time I use that. I can simply apply it. I no longer have to think about it once I realize and understand that in my thinking, because mathematics works. It adds up for the most part. At certain points, it starts falling apart. Ironically, when it approaches infinity, the mathematics and the numbers start to sort of fall apart in this very odd way. Because they're dealing now with something that's not based in mathematics and numbers and here and there and then and now and all of the relative issues that we deal with at a human level.
So, David, when was it not okay for you to be seen as weak?
Oh man, that was a very young age. You know, my dad always wanted me to be a tough guy, you know, and the way he raised me and the things he did, I mean, he wasn't very violent toward me, like physically, but mentally, you know, and emotionally, you know, because he was, for whatever he went through in his life, you know, it spilled down on top of me. And my dad was raised on a reservation. And so it spilled down on top of me to where it's like he was out of touch when I needed him to be in touch. And I fought for that. And then when he did talk to me, it was, you know, he was taking karate and all this type of stuff. It was always tough man talk, you know, but he did teach me other lessons in life. And I can't say he didn't. But then when my mom left, he became this gangster in the street, like through his pain. And then when we came back, I was 10 years old. He gave me every bit of that venom, and I became that venomous person. So
how big was he?
My dad was only 5'10", like 220 pounds.
That's
my mom was
5'10".
the big person. My mom was 5'8", like 300 pounds. Yeah, so she was the one I feared physically, you know, because if I got out of line or whatever, I mean, my mom whooped the shit out of me, you know, and if I didn't take care of the kids, like she was in such a depression, and when things needed to get done, I had an older brother and an older sister, but they relied on me more. And if it didn't get done, you know, I got woken up with the belt, you know, until I was about 13 or 14 years old. And I finally grabbed my mom and I said, if you hit me again, I'm gonna hit you back. I said,
yeah, you told me that.
Yeah, stop fucking hitting me. And my dad, he came and he hit me, and he had to beat my ass that night, you know, because I swung on him, and he was swinging, but I wouldn't stop. I was swinging for life. I was just a little helicopter, and he was just blocking and smacking me. And that's the only time that I really remember him hitting me like that. But I was attacking him, you know. But it's just, I got fed up to the point where it's like, I'm ready to fight my parents now, because I don't have parents. I got friends. That's why I truly felt, you know, and
the gangs kind of feed off of that too. You create a new family.
Yeah. You know, and being in the gang, you know, when I was growing up, like we just, with each other, we were all little lost souls, and we went, and I don't know how it just turned from, we had a wrestling little circuit. I met a lot of my friends through fighting, and like it's all fighting is, you know, considered violent, but you know, but it wasn't on that level. Like it wasn't out of hate. It was just like, hey, I know this guy over here. You know, he said he can wrestle real good. I said, take me over there, and we would go over there and we would compete, and then whoever's going to be the king of the hill, and all of a sudden, you know, every person that we wrestled or fought and won, we're all together now. We're a band of thieves, you know. But
so that's interesting. I'm sorry I interrupted you, but
it's okay.
So that's interesting, because what I did when I first started training was I instead of going to like one school, and I went to 4 schools, and because I already didn't believe that everybody knew what they were talking about. Mm-hmm. So I signed up at 4 schools at once. And then I used to go from school to school to school to school and visit schools. And then I'd walk in and I go, you know, I think, you know, I'd like to come in and spar. I'd like to come in and train here. And then if they let me, then, and everybody let me. And then I started making a name for myself, and I would travel to New York City every weekend, and I would do this. And then I moved to New York City, I moved to Chinatown, and then I, so on and so forth. But the point is that I did that same thing that you're doing. You find out, like, I used to walk into bars and walk and try to find the biggest motherfucker I could find, like walk in and find you, right? And walk right up to you. And I think we should fight. And people would be like, what? No, I think that you and I should go out in the back and fight. And they'd be like, what? And that's what I went into that bar for, to fight a person that was supposed to be this incredible fighter. So I fought one quick story. I fought this American Indian, and he was probably not as big as you, but taller, and we got into this thing with this fight, and I was basically just one leg. I mean, that was about it at that point in time. This was like 1974, and it was a world-class leg, and you never saw it coming. But what he did is he ran in at me, headbutted me in the stomach, and then picked his head up really fast and caught me under the jaw and broke my jaw and knocked me unconscious. And then we became friends. And then I found out that
I hope so.
Well, we became friends, and because I started fighting on an Indian reservation in Southampton, New York, every weekend. We became friends, and I found out that was the only thing he could do. Never practiced anything else. He just practiced that all the time. And that was his technique, that was how he fought. And he fought like that all the time. So he used to use his head on a heavy bag and and learn to hit people with the top of his head and so on and so forth. So that's just a funny little story. And yeah, he fucked me up.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. But most of my friends, I've learned through experiences of, like I said, we met each other fighting, and and then we became close. But we were always able to talk to each other about things, and say tease each other, practical jokes or whatever. But if it's somebody else I didn't know and didn't go through those things with me, man, you couldn't cross that line with me. It was like, we're really gonna fight now. I don't give a fuck about the competition, whatever. We're really gonna fight. And that's what it became for me. And it's just like there's so much that happened in a short period of time in shaping who I was or where I ended up. And I would say between 12 and 16 was the period where I became this person where everyone respected me, and they respected where I stood, where my word became valid and what I would say in groups of people,
And when was the first time, if you want to answer, that you were incarcerated?
I was 15 in 1988, and I was scared to death. And that first moment, I remember, because when I got arrested, it was for something that I didn't do. But I did, but didn't do. It was like I had the car, but I borrowed the car from one of my homeboys' mothers that was on drugs, just to go impress this girl. And when I got up she worked at the Burger King, and I went in there, and it was behind Venice High. And I seen the cops, and back in them days, we used to be like, why are the cops always fucking with us? We're driving on, well, shit, you're only like 14 or 15 years old, and it's not your car. That's why they're fucking with you. But
those cops.
Yeah, damn it.
What were they thinking?
Yeah, bothering us people. But I got arrested, and I went to the police station, and now it's like I couldn't get in touch with my mom and everything. tried calling, and I went up to Sylmar Juvenile Hall, and I was locked in this cell, and it really felt like I got kidnapped and sent to a foreign land. And I was in there like really like a caged animal, but a wounded one, because I'm introduced to something I've never ever felt. And when people were getting visits, I was just like, this is a luxury for these people because their parents know where they're at. My parents don't know where I am, and I know my mom is going crazy. And I was just staring out the window one day into the quad, and I seen my mama walking by. And boy, I burst out into tears right there. I was so damn happy that she came. And at that point, I was fearful of everything that was going on with me, going to showers and going to meals and everything. And I'm dealing with cats on a whole different level. These ain't my friends, so I'm not used to a stranger walking up to me like this. And once she came and visited me, I don't know what kind of power she gave me, but man, I became a fucking demon in there. I wasn't afraid anymore because I knew she knew where I was at. And I know it's a strange story, but after that, oh man, you couldn't say shit. I was fighting everything, staff, everybody. Yeah.
How did she give you that confidence?
I don't know. I was just happy that she knew where I was at and she knew that I was all right. I was more worried about how she was feeling about me. And then my little brothers, I couldn't be there with them because I was always their protector. So I felt empty without that. But knowing that was...
You see the allegiance we have to our parents, regardless of what they do.
Yeah.
There's a natural connection. And my sense is we love them. And all we want from them is love. And most of what we're trying to do to impress them as youth is trying to do the things that they think we need to be or become. And much of that isn't true. It's just a conclusion we make to try to do what makes them happy or gives them the impression we're everything they think we should be.
Mm-hmm.
So, question eventually here is, how long do we tell these stories before we begin to see that it was an internal conflict with our own sense of who we are and our own ideas about who we are, that we were constantly trying to use to justify doing all these things that never accomplished what we set out to do, because it meant constantly trying to prove ourself, as though ourself was built out of proof, reason, understanding, thought. Again, if who we think we are is all we are, everything we think we need to do, we need to understand and use reason to accomplish. When it's unreasonable and we've misunderstood the whole point of our existence, what are the chances any of those things are ever going to work? They can't work. They don't have any applicable purpose. The demon that we're trying to kill is the one we've created in our imagination about who we think we are. We're constantly trying to overcome the thoughts we have about who that needs to be. And the thoughts are constantly changing while we're constantly changing to try to adjust and try to keep up with the thinking that's going on internally. And we tell those stories well as adults, as though they're still real and still happening, rather than begin to see we're still struggling with the exact same issue and we're well beyond the reach of our folks, our parents.
Yeah, I am still doing that.
Yes. Yeah. So the question is, if we have a sense of clarity in the stories we tell, we're really using them to justify why we don't want to let go of what we made believe was true now. We still feel like we're the effect of that to some degree. We still feel like that battle is still happening, but we're getting better at the battle because, as you said, John, as you're getting older, you just don't seem to have the energy to do it, which is a beautiful thing about age, actually. It sort of reveals that there's no effort in being. None. Absolutely none. There's no effort in truth.
About 3 years ago, me and my dad were having a talk, and he was talking at me. And, and always respecting my father, or whatnot. And, the thing that just troubled me a lot was like, I always envy people that how they loved their parents and how they felt about them and how their parents treated them, but my parents treated me as a friend. And I never really had that parental, they see me as someone I was next in line to take care of the family. But my father was talking to me one day and we were sitting down on the couch and I'm just letting him talk at me, and you don't know how to do this and you don't know how to do that. And I said, you don't know what the fuck I can do. And he looked at me and I said, you don't even know me. I'm your own son. I'm named after you. You don't know what the hell I can do. You don't even know what I've done because you never asked me about my accomplishments. And when I started telling him all the things that I learned in prison, and then my dad, he was a heavy drinker with Budweiser. He would drink those tall cans and he would just knock them back constantly. And when I told him everything that I'd done and all the things that I was involved in the last 25 years, my dad lost his appetite for that beer. He got up, put that beer in the fridge, went, got in the car and left, didn't even say goodbye. Because he realized how much he missed in my life or how much I was doing. And true, I was trying, my dad went to college and he used to take me to college with him sometimes. I would go and I would see it. And I always wanted to be that, but I didn't understand it at that point. But when I got a chance to get education and do the things I needed to do, I would go through it so fast that they would tell me to slow down. They say, you're not retaining the knowledge. I'm like, well, shit, give me a test and I'll show you, and that was one of the things why the board didn't want to let me out also, because they said, you couldn't possibly be doing all of this. It has to be some type of manipulation or whatever. But I kept coming. And every time I went in, I had a new trade. I had I had trades in welding and all that. But telling my dad this, and then I smushed it in his face, and it was just like, you don't know me. You just think that all you hear is the stories of me being violent in there, but I had no choice. You don't know what it's like getting hit in your sleep, and you have to fight with your eyes closed because you don't know where it's coming from because you're halfway knocked out while you're being unconscious, and you're fighting for your life. And then you got to get up and put your fucking jaw back in place by yourself because you can't go to the cops. I've been through a lot of traumas, but that's the only thing people understand and respect about me. They don't respect that. And when I say I did this, I did that, and they know, oh, okay, yeah. But this. And that's the part that frustrates the shit out of me.
Well, David, consider, because you're talking about it, and I can see the frustration in your face, especially coming from a father, that you would expect to have some degree of maturity and perspective that might offer you that insight. But consider that the real frustration is your own experience of who you think you are, rather than who you actually are. And the mental anguish can never be greater by what someone else does than how we treat what's happening in our own thinking. Because the mental anguish in our own thinking is immediate for us. Our experience is not always frustrated by what's happening. Certainly there are challenges that are brutal in life and can be, and are difficult. But our thinking about them is the thing that seems to last beyond the circumstances. When they're over, we're still thinking about them in ways we think are true and creating an internal mental grind that we also think is true when all it is imagined and thought to be real. And that grind is the greatest trauma we can produce because it creates a present state of feeling completely out of sorts, disconcerted, unstable. And what are we trying to do most of the time? Stabilize it by having circumstances go our way and proving to other people and starting to blame them for what we're actually doing, including parents. Your dad's going to do what he does. Your mom's going to do what she does at this point. And that brutality and that ability, as we talked about a little bit earlier today, where you said as you start seeing some of these things, you try to communicate it. You don't have a lot of skill at communicating it. It's frustrating. And yet we seem to have a great skill at repeating the stories with a sense of expertise, because obviously it's our experience we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And yet those stories over time have changed too. They've changed with our own insight and our own understanding and our own ability to have perspective with time. Time offers great perspective because the further you get from something, the broader you see it. And time basically, time's a function of distance. Yeah, you just have a better way of looking at it because it's clearer. If everything that's changing is always changing, the one thing that doesn't change is that everything's changing. And as we talked about a little bit earlier, when it comes to the absolute, if you notice that what seems relative only seems relative when I'm focused on the bits and pieces, when I think of it in total, now that would be the broadest perspective I could have, all of a sudden it becomes absolute, because if everything's always changing, the one thing that isn't changing is that everything's changing. And now I have both ends of that seeming spectrum. In my own understanding, in my own witness, in my own experience, I'm starting to notice if I can observe that, maybe that's what I'm always observing. And what I'm frustrated with are these limited incursions that I create and these limited stakes that I hammer into the ground by taking a position that I think is the only position to take. And as a result, now I'm opposed to everything else and every other position around me, rather than realizing that doesn't happen unless I take a position that I think is the only position. And now I'm going to be defensive about that position and start to actually create this antagonism and this internal dialogue that's actually attempting to put out the fire that I'm consistently willing to lighten. And it's rampaging in me while I claim to be putting it out. I'm adding fuel to it with the same form of thinking in a new way, seemingly new way, because everything's always new. But if it's new based on the old thinking, it's the same instability that I'm fostering, the same discontent, the same irritability, the same friction, neurosis, anxiety, disorder. I'm putting thinking ahead of everything rather than knowing that I have an absolute basis. And my sense is we've always been aware of that. We haven't been talking about it because it's so obvious. We think everyone else knows. And they do. So when we talk to them from thinking about what we should say, rather than simply expressing the purity of our already clear knowledge, and realize I don't have a lot of practice talking about that. I've been practicing for decades how to tell my story to excuse where I am, rather than speak honestly and responsibly about who and what I actually am, which is very much connected to everything and everyone else. It's not disconnected at all. So that sense we have of our parents, my sense is when you saw your mother, that was your root. This is the woman you loved. You never lived in another woman.
Yeah.
She's an important person to have as an ally when you're young.
Yeah.
Right? She gave you literally food, shelter, and clothing before you were even born.
Yeah.
She housed you. She did all that, regardless of her own defects, her own shortcomings, her own struggles. And we've consistently, generation after generation, as far as I can tell, inherited a lot of these traits as a function of making believe we're loving our parents by maintaining those things we thought were important to them, when a lot of what they were thinking was sick. And we've inherited toxic tendencies that we think are normal and natural for us, and part of our DNA, when all they are is part of a repetitive cycle of experience we're trying to finally turn into truth so we can live with it at peace, while it's creating the lack of peace that we're experiencing day in and day out, which is impossible to live with happily and at peace, and to rest and to have a good night's sleep and to be able to have compassion for others who are struggling with the same thing. We begin to hold them in contempt and spite what they're doing and think they're wrong because they antagonize and show us that part we're not interested in looking at, that we're actually the center and the cause of individually. So I think you said earlier, some of this tends to go over your head, but you have a sense of it. You have a sense of knowing it, but you don't have a lot of experience expressing it.
It's one of those things where, like you say, yeah, I do know it. But when we're speaking, sometimes we like from your understanding and where you feel you understand it and you say it, I have to sit down and listen to catch it, because of the words you're thinking as you're thinking, because you thought, and it's just like sometimes I have to catch that cadence. you know, so I can keep up in the conversation. Not to say that I'm not understanding it, you know, and can express myself. I express myself very well.
Part of the nudge, David, is to start to recognize that we know.
Yeah.
And if I can live with that for 10 minutes, it's interesting how clearly my thoughts start expressing in words, which seem relative, but are now actually following and expressing this sense of knowing, rather than trying through understanding and reason and logic to conclude that I know within thinking. When I express this knowing, which is my suspicion is exactly what thoughts are designed to do, is to express what is called intuition. And intuition is knowledge beyond reason, meaning reason and understanding and logic and thinking are not involved in it at all. So when I go to eat something and I know that I've got to get it to my mouth, I use my arm. I don't do a lot of thinking about that. I don't say, what are all the physiological dynamics going on with the synapses and the nerves right now that are communicating with my brain and my elbow and my wrist and my hands and my fingers to pick up the fork? And if I started thinking like that, I'd starve to death, thinking that I needed to come to conclusions about what my arm was capable of doing before I could simply utilize it. And we do it with thinking, somehow thinking because it can think of itself. My arm doesn't think of itself. It just is an arm.
Yeah.
And if I start thinking about my arm and I think who I am is my arm, I would think I have nothing else. I don't have a mouth to feed because all I am is an arm. But when I think about thinking and all of a sudden think it's who I am, now I'm stuck in a loop of thinking about this I am as though I have no other essence. I have no other knowing awareness. I have no other presence. I have no other basis in life but thought. Constantly thinking about itself, trying to know, when in fact I can never know in thinking if I don't admit I know and have an awareness that doesn't think. And the point of that is, in religion, we talk about an infinite God, an infinite spirit. If it's infinite, it can't be exclusive to one person and not somebody else because they behave in a certain way or wear certain clothes or have a certain type of hat or do a certain thing with their hands and their mouth. It would naturally include nature, and we're a function of nature because we have bodies that are based on nature and we utilize nature every day to survive. Breathing, water, air, all of it, food, it's all part of our system. None of it we can exclude from our experience or we would die very quickly in terms of our human experience. We're designed to interact with this nature flawlessly and purely, just as nature is offering itself to us. We have the capacity to offer ourselves to it, rather than abuse it and excessively use it and overuse it and think that somehow we can take as much as we possibly can take for the sake of our own interest and nothing's going to go wrong for anybody else as a result of that line of thinking. It's that same thinking that thinking's the solution, rather than recognizing thinking, expressing, knowing doesn't even have a problem because it intuitively knows what to do. There is no solution in that because there's no problem in that. It just, we know better to do what's the best thing we can do, which generally is the thing that's good for everybody. Greatest good for the greatest number. Just naturally happens.
So, David, how well do you know you? The reason I ask that is because it's changing for me.
Yeah.
Tell us about your experience, John.
Well, for me, I'm not sure that I really know myself. There's so much, there's so much, hidden and some things forgotten. And I really, if I'm writing a poem, and it just keeps going and going and going and going. I think that, my mind is, writing not only, a novel and a poem at the same time, but it might be writing 2 books at the same time. And, I just did I just did a ketamine therapy 3 days ago, and with my doctor. And when you start like unveiling and unveiling and opening and opening and opening and opening and opening, and I never did any kind of like hallucinogenic drugs in my youth. But
Sorry to hear that.
when you when you start to like, you know, just kind of turning inside out while your eyes are wide awake, it's a transitory experience, and very hard to articulate. Although I wrote a big poem in the last 2 days. It's called "Ketamine So Pink and Green," and the reason I ask is because I really think that there's just so much more in there that I'm not aware of as this entity.
So I'm going to offer you a couple of thoughts. If you're looking for truth in thought, you're only ever looking from the present, where you already know, you know. And what you're looking for is for thought to convince you that you know. And what you're going to do is retell stories. You're talking about it. If you listen to your words and re-listen to what you said, you're talking about the impossibility. Even earlier when you said we're on the same page, and I said, what's the book? Because the books and the volumes of books that we've written in our own thinking to try to maintain and try to finally put a period at the end of the sentence, this life sentence that we seem to be condemned by, and it constantly goes on and on and on, is only coming from the idea that our thoughts are our salvation. Our thoughts are our redemption. Our thoughts are the sum total of our existence. The more I look to figure out what I think is hidden, the more I find things that seem to be so fascinating, because I've come up with new illusions about things I thought were hidden, when in fact the things that were hidden weren't hidden at all. They're simply what I'm doing I'm not thinking about anything at any other time than what I'm thinking about in the present. And that's where the mental obsession is created, and that's where it is maintained. There is no other place for it. There is no past. There is nothing but story about what happened, which is no longer happening. So what's happening? My telling of the story now. If I'm telling the story to try to get where I already am, and I constantly feel like I need to tell the story more, I am claiming de facto I am not where I am. The one place I always am is the place I'm claiming never to be. That is a problem. That is an impossibility. And it will lead to more and more and more thinking about the thinking the thinking will finally solve it, rather than say, oh, I've been digging a hole and all I've gotten is so deep in the hole that I can't even climb out of the hole. I can't even get the dirt out of the hole anymore. So I can't even get the hole deeper. Because every shovel load I dig and throw over my shoulder ends up back in the hole. I can't get any deeper. All I can do is work to imagine I can get deeper, when in fact there's no depth to this at all. It's insanity imagining someday I'll get to China if I keep digging. Like I used to say when they were kids, if you dig deep enough, you're going to end up in China. Meaning you could dig through the entire planet. Think about that.
So you said the same thing because of my my out of body experience practice.
Yes.
That I've been working on for like 3 months.
Right.
At night, and even more successfully in the morning. And I understand what you're saying. The interesting thing about the out of body experience and this ketamine, I think it's called therapy, but don't quote me, is that there's no thinking involved. It's all like this rush of emotion.
Well, it's knowing. And the rush of emotion is actually the current. Think about the current being present, and also a current, a flow, time. We're flowing through time, but we're always in the present. When you begin to actually experience and witness what's actually happening rather than this logjam of thinking about thinking, all of a sudden you realize we're in an incredibly dynamic state that is not only fulfilling, but fulfilled. It isn't fulfilling as though something needs to be done. It's full and complete. It is pure, it is absolute, and it is present. And we've never been in our bodies any more than an absolute infinite source can be in us. We are simply of it. So if I have an obsessive thought, I can think that everything starts. I can think that all that is the thought. That's one way I can deal with it, and say everything I'm thinking is all I can be doing. It's all I am. It's all I can do. I can't do anything else. That's an addictive thought. I can also say the limits are the beginning of everything else. They're not the end of anything, which is to begin to at least concede that there's something beyond the horizon that I can't see. And the fact that I can't see it doesn't mean it's not there. And then I can begin to see, well, if that infinite source is always beyond those limits, no matter how big I make the limits, it's always going to be infinitely more. Then I begin to see that the infinite is also within those limits, because it can't be excluded by my thinking. It must be a part of thinking. So thinking now becomes a product of the infinite rather than the creator of the infinite. It's not going to come from thinking about thinking, because I'm already where I am, knowing about knowing. And as I begin to concede that, all of a sudden thinking becomes not necessary, but a simple option. And I start thinking in ways I never would think I could, because I'm starting to actually allow that knowing to be the leader, the source, the absolute state of knowing. And my thinking now starts operating on that same basis. The big book talks about that a lot. We'll straighten out emotionally and physically. Our thinking will straighten out. Bill Wilson didn't say we're not supposed to be thinking. He talked about affirmative thinking, meaning we're affirming the relationship we have to an absolute source. And when you realize the relationship isn't relative, it means it's the essence of our knowing existence. It's an absolute state of being, which is why step 11 is so important. Prayer and meditation. What's prayer? Starting to talk, rather than talk to my thoughts, which we say, I'm talking to myself. Think about that. We talk to ourselves. We're admitting that we think the thinking we're doing is who we are. And I'm thinking to myself. Those are two things we tend to say, right? We're really thinking to our thinking, and we're thinking about our thinking. We're not thinking about ourselves. We've just decided that who we are is what we think. So when I think about my thinking, I'm thinking about myself. That's interesting. All we're doing is creating more thoughts. And if we're creating more thoughts by thinking more, we're constantly thinking more and more and more and more and more will finally get us there. But if the limit expanded as much as we can possibly expand, it is always infinitely bigger. So there's no amount of thinking that's ever going to get us there, because it isn't something that is designed to function at an absolute level. It's designed to express an absolute source. That's where it becomes possible. It isn't conclusive in understanding my thinking. It's conclusive in understanding that my thinking is a product of, like my body, a natural source of consciousness that isn't limited. It just knows it knows. It doesn't think of itself. Even in that thing I sent you, John, about the CIA doing this investigation 40 years ago about trying to use mental telepathy and trying to use consciousness to be able to affect change. And that the report was pretty broad. And I don't know if you have it in front of you, but if you can mention where it came from, maybe the audience would be interested in listening to that.
I think it came from Popular Mechanics.
Yeah, it was Popular Mechanics. That's right. And it's right now through the Apple News thing. It's sort of, but I forget the name of it exactly. 40 years ago, the CIA tried to decode consciousness.
40 years ago.
And unlock time travel. So it's interesting that here our own government is starting to tap into this stuff while it's denying.
Anyway, so yeah, I'm very familiar with.
You there?
I am. I tried to open it and it interfered with our conversation.
I don't know.
But
I gave the heading. I gave the heading to it.
Yeah, I'm really familiar with all the things that they were doing back then and what they accomplished, and all the astral projection guys and everybody who participated, and I've read all the books on those that those guys wrote, and it's incredible.
Yeah. Well, now consider from our vantage point, meaning the place we're sitting, the presence that we're in right now. That is the incredible place. That is the thing that they're aiming at and thinking they need to harness and develop a skill to achieve, when in fact the only thing that's interfering with it is the static we're creating by constantly addictively relying on thought as though it's our only source. That's all that's
sometimes it
interfering with
is.
Well, we think it is.
No, I mean, you speak of thoughts from a free mind, but like when you're in confinement, and it's the same thing. I always ask people, do you think an inmate and a POW are the same person? What they went through, one's looked at as a hero, because he survived, but you have someone that's been in there who's done a life sentence and they survived that. They're just like, oh, that's what you deserve. But when you're in those confinements and you're in that small space and that space starts to shrink down on you, and then you can't breathe, and then you really start feeling the size of the building and the size of the world, whatever. And that's that moment where it's just like, if I don't think different thoughts or even create fantasies in my mind, I'm not going to survive. I'm gonna just,
Well, you described the scream, David, in the first episode of the guy who finally comes to terms with the situation and starts to notice that he's where he is, that he's incarcerated, and he's finally looking at it honestly and lets out a scream that makes everyone else quiet because they're all aware.
That's a scary moment.
Yes.
Where, it sounds good from the outside. It really does. When you make sense of it, it sounds good. But for a human to go through that, you know what I'm saying?
Do you know what though, David?
Let me finish. But for a human to go through that kind of pain and that mental anguish that another human being is putting him through, that's a whole nother level of understanding that you're not going to ever be able to understand because you're never going to go through it.
So that is what we're witnessing on a daily basis when we feel we are trapped.
I don't think so.
When we feel we are trapped with the beast, it may not be as intense or seem as intense, but look at the anxiety disorders that are killing people. Look at the activities. We've had 150 people killed this year.
That's a personal choice.
I understand.
That's a personal choice. As I said, you're never going to be able to understand it or express this to me because you've never been through it.
I got it.
And then these are those things where I try to express to people, and then they tell me certain things about me. I'm like, oh, you'll never understand me, man. If you haven't walked or held my hand through that, you'll never understand it.
But you're still struggling, David, with those thoughts about something that's no longer happening to you. And trauma. The confrontation, you know why there's fear attached to it? Because we're filled with fear and trauma presently, making believe that we are condemned by the thoughts that we're thinking, and we're condemned by the imagery and the narratives we've created and the circumstances we've created on earth to subject people to horrifying seeming realities, the brutality, the violence that we subject people to today, right now. People are suffering from those things as a consequence of yours and my inability to come to terms with what we're doing in our own thinking and have so little influence over people that we can barely talk about it honestly in public and have an influence that might help people open their eyes and say, you know what? We're all responsible for this. And nobody who's suffering is suffering alone because we all wear the weight of it and are clearly aware of it and don't like it. And we know we don't like it. And yet what do? Try to feel better myself today and try to get a little more for me because I'm constantly trying to avoid this demon that I think is chasing me inside my own thinking that I've created and am responsible for.
Yeah, there is accountability involved with it. And
I would say
responsibility but I would, you know, one of the things that you get to comment on is the vulnerability that I'm choosing to expose right now, to be 100% honest and be on here. And, you know, that right there is sacred. And I'm giving this to everybody right now. So it's like when you said you see the discomfort on my face, I don't like being vulnerable, you know, because I feel backed in the corner and I fight to get out of the corner.
Do you know why? Because the thing you're defending is weak. And you know it's weak because it's nothing more than an idea thought to be true and thought to be real.
Yeah.
Well, because you know what's really weak is an idea that we think is true that's not true. You know why it's weak? It doesn't have any other basis than our thinking about it is something that it isn't. A lie functions on one basis, that it's true. And you know what the one thing a lie can't be is true.
Yeah.
So it claims to be only what it isn't. And what we struggle over and defend are ideas that have absolutely no basis except our own willingness to consider them true. And then we wonder why vulnerability is hard to face, because accountability is in saying, I'm maintaining a lie which is weak, so weak as to not even exist for me to even be imagining I can defend it at all. That's insanity roaming in our own thinking that we are scared to death to admit, literally, and yet live to tell the story. We talk about being scared to death, but nobody I know of has ever been scared to death and lived to talk about it.
What? What do you mean? Oh, because they didn't die?
Exactly. We talk about it as though we're dying, and we don't even die.
I've been fucking scared, man. And what he's talking about is a man becoming so scared that he breaks.
But remember what he said about that following morning, David.
Yeah. But he's talking about, he's molded it, I believe, into one person for us. But it's really about thousands of people. Is that not right, David?
It's about 8 million people today. It's about 8 million people, according to the current count. This isn't exclusive to our discussion. This is inclusive of all people who exist. If you and I, as people that know each other, have a difficult time talking about this as an absolute source of being that we share, clearly there's some dysfunction happening at a level that everyone has been either contaminated with or is continuing to promote the contamination of feeling alone and feeling separate and feeling that these horrifying things that we put people, you know why those things happen? Because someone thinks they're proving themselves right by condemning people to those conditions. You know why they're fighting that way? Because what they're trying to prove is right is wrong, period. That's why it happens. That's why people in charge of countries think they can justify killing their own citizens simply because they don't think like them. And they say, I'm the ruler, I'm the supreme ruler, I get to do this because I have the authority to do that. Because they're treasonous. They're defying what I think so I can kill them. That's been going on in human history from the beginning.
It's bred into us. But
hang on, John. It isn't bred into us so sufficiently as to right now not notice that in the freedom of the presence, by the way, freedom, that every moment has every possibility attached to it, always, all possibilities, which means no impossibilities, all possibilities. If all possibility is possible right now, one of the possibilities is to talk about this accurately enough that the traumatic experience of continuing to repeat the stories we've been maintaining as a culture begin to dissipate because they begin to be seen as what they are, which is an illusion being thought to be real, which is simply a delusion. That's it. It's no more than we make of it now. That seems to exist.
I understand you're pushing the big picture, and I understand that, but you're talking about people, like David living in an oven.
No, I'm talking about you and I. Oven. I'm talking about you and I right now not coming up with new excuses to justify why we can't talk about it and start to actually notice that we're perfectly free to talk about it, but we seem compelled to come up with excuses to justify not doing it. Why don't we get good at it? We don't practice it. Well, what are we getting good at? Practicing a new story, a new narrative to justify. Behind the but is a negation of the point. And always,
Yes, it is.
so that's, if there's healing and if there's any interest in not having other people subjected to the horrors you face, David, it comes in the healings and the reclamation and the resurrection, literally on the heels of Easter, which is all about resurrection and coming to life after seeming death. And you mentioned that guy who walked out of that cell, I think you said, I'm almost embarrassed to say that he looked like he was at perfect peace from having faced that fear. Now, let me tell you, all the fear is what he was thinking that was wrong. That's the fear. The fact is,
no, that's not right, Jack.
Hang tight.
That is not right, Jack.
Hang tight. The cell never shrinks. It just feels smaller. It feels claustrophobic. It feels like it's closing in on us. All those cells are probably the same size now as they were then. It's the impact.
Yeah, he's not talking about a cell size, Jack. He's talking about being broken by other people.
David mentioned feeling it was shrinking and closing in. It's the awareness of our own narrow thoughts that are closing in, and making that awareness obvious will have you feel the fear that you've been defending against and fighting your whole life, thinking somehow you will conquer it, because it's self-induced and self-imposed. It's created in our own experience.
I don't feel it's self-induced.
I got it.
Yeah,
that's my argument. Which is why you're still struggling with it.
Yeah, when you go through things as a child and you get sentenced as an adult as a child, and then you go through these adult things and you're trying to shape your mind. For one, you're becoming devious as hell. Like I said, when I say you running around there, you're the predator. That's the only way you're going to survive is being a predator. You're going out and knowing that.
How about right now? How about right now? How about right now, David?
I know, but I'm going back to express the story to say
I got it.
Where I was at to where I'm at now.
I got it. So where you are now is not a story. Where you are now,
it's the whole story.
No, it isn't. Right now.
Yes, it is.
Do you think you're telling the story of reality when everything that's happening right now is happening?
It's my reality.
It isn't your reality.
It is.
No, it isn't. It's your opinion of a reality that you think is true because it's born of thought. It's exactly what condemns us.
It was born of action. Not my thoughts.
Yeah, but you know what a thought is? You know what a thought is? A primary action. It's
also born of time for him.
Okay, but what is time right now in the present?
But
where is the past? Where is the past right now?
But he lost time.
No, he didn't. He didn't lose time. He spent 18 years in prison. That isn't lost time.
22 years.
Was it 22?
Yes.
Yeah. So the point is, I know this is hard to talk about, and I know that it begins to approach those defenses of the thoughts we have that we think are true and we think define us and we think they're our own. We think we can have our own reality, which isn't anybody else's reality but ourselves. Think about that. It can't possibly be real if it isn't shared by everyone. And to start thinking in those terms allows for the limits of the defenses that we've been using to express in broader. David, every thought leads to an action because thoughts are primary actions. They're things that are happening. Every one of them. If I'm basing my life on scarce thoughts, I'm going to live and experience scarcity in my life. If I'm basing my thoughts on fights, I'm going to find fights in my life occur because I'm going to be preoccupied with that in my own experience. It's just natural. We're manifesting and focusing on only what we think is happening rather than what's actually happening. And what's always happening right now is everything. And there is no story in that because there's no narrative capable of dealing. We would have to infinitesimally in a moment speak to everything happening to be able to address it in thought, while everything that's happening is everything that's happening right now, regardless of what we think. And it's a little bit of evidence that there's a lot more going on than we can ever think of. So we know more than we think. And if we constantly focus on what we think, all we're doing is creating trauma in the present, making believe that someday it will become true. The harder I tell my story, the more I defend it, the more I justify it. And it's killing all of us and those other people, David, experiencing what you've experienced in ways that are probably even harsher in many of ways than you experienced. Right?
Well, let me take it off him for a second. Give him a breather. For me, there's so much hidden inside me.
Impossible.
The story, just hang on there, that the story is even less apparent to me over time.
You're acting oblivious to what's happening in reality by making believe you're going to come to your own terms in your own reality. Of course, things seem hidden to you because it's a perfect story to tell about why you can't do anything about it. Nothing's hidden.
But yes, that is hidden. They are
John,
within me, hidden from you and David.
It's happening right now. They're not hidden from us at all. The sum total of your expression and everything you do is based on all those things you think are hidden. All of your anxieties, all of your phobias, all of your defenses, all of your reactions are all based on what you think is hidden. That isn't hidden. They're being expressed all the time. We just think people don't see them because we're so busy putting this image on of who we think we are and projecting these ideas of wanting people to see us only as what we think rather than what we're actually doing in this seeming subconsciousness.
I don't know what your level of clairvoyance is, but I will tell you that you know only of me, of what I give you.
I would say that there is an absolute sense of awareness. If there's an absolute knowing awareness, we all know we know. And all we do is undermine our telepathic communication and our abilities at levels so far beyond thinking that humanity and culture through history has been hamstrung, literally holding itself back by trying to claim proof and trying to claim credit for things that are simply natural. And even if they're unnatural in our own expression, where they pollute the earth, it's a natural consequence that the pollution of those polluted toxic thoughts would express. So
you are using one of your two favorite words and as a justification of what can be.
And what is right now.
Okay, what is? And it's a justification of what is, and it is not reality based.
So let me ask you a question.
Mm-hmm.
If where we are is where we are right now,
mm-hmm.
Is that where we are? And wouldn't that apply to everything everywhere at the same time? If the present right now is where everything's happening, and if you doubt this, just check yourself during the week and ask yourself wherever you are, am I here? And
I say all day long, probably at least 24 times a day, am I dreaming?
Okay. But if you're dreaming, that's what you're doing in the present. And I would say the entirety of our experience is largely an illusion because it's largely translated by thoughts. But think of this. What are thoughts translating? Senses. Our senses are feeding information to our thoughts. They're not giving thoughts to thoughts. They're giving sensations to thoughts, right? That's just raw data being translated by our bodies. Now, if we have a knowing sense and what we do in thinking about that raw data is wrong, we're going to feel wrong naturally. We're going to feel discontent naturally. We're going to feel irritated naturally. We're going to feel defensive naturally because our thinking is inaccurately assessing the environment, which puts us at risk. And
go ahead, I'm sorry.
It's all right, go.
When something is unnatural in your discussion, it is something that is negative.
No, it just doesn't. It's attempting to negate reality and truth by making believe that if I do something opposed to nature, I will succeed in proving who I really am.
And the
that
good,
sort of proof is what humans have done for centuries, that have oppressed and suppressed and killed other people in the name of that proof. What's that?
say it again, David.
David froze.
David,
Shit.
we
We
can
heard
hear
the
you.
shit, David.
We
heard
can hear
shit.
you.
David, try turning your video off if the feed isn't. The audio might work better. I'm going to stop your video if I can. David, you there? All right, he might have been bounced.
What does that mean?
He might have fallen off. He's coming back.
Off.
Just
off the thing?
outside of Zoom.
Oh.
All right, you're back.
Yeah, something just kicked me out of the meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some telepathic ghost.
Yeah.
So look,
Yeah.
let me suggest something. Look at your reactions. Look at the responses. Look at the triggers of even talking about this openly in relation to the thoughts you have about what you think are true. I'm not telling you you shouldn't have those thoughts. I'm not telling you you can't have those thoughts. You're perfectly welcome to those thoughts. What I'm telling you is that they are thoughts and they are imagined. And to imagine thinking is true is to put yourself in opposition to reality and truth and have a natural defensive experience and reactive and impulsive and compulsive experience in your own life, and also act in ways that are deficient and scarce and constantly struggling to try to get even and try to have an experience that's fulfilling, because that reliance is never going to be fulfilling. It's simply not true. And my sense is it's the greatest present traumatic stress we create, because it's creating in the same place that our thoughts are our feelings and our emotions and our pleasure and pain zones. Same place. Who could harm us more than the experience we're having with the self we think we are? This idea of self being real and true and ego being reality, and, oh, it's just my ego getting the best of me, as though there's something in us, a ghost, floating around that has control of us, when in fact we've assigned it that control so that we can continue to act irresponsibly and think irresponsibly and make believe that the stories we tell about it somehow justifies it, so we can continue to go ahead and be anxious and depressed and frustrated and not know how to deal with people and just give up. That doesn't seem like a very active, proactive life to me. And I've experienced it enough that I want to talk about it honestly and openly. And I'm ready for the reactions. I'm ready for the dismissiveness. I'm ready for the discounting. I want it, because talking about it actually gives us a chance to have a little perspective and see that there's a lot of pressure that builds up in the compression of trying to make believe that we can minimize something that's causing such an enormous impact on our existence, when in fact there's nothing there but a thought being thought to be true and real. It's just imagined. And the knowing sense, as we begin to concede that simple point, starts to become more obvious and more obvious and more obvious. And you'll start thinking things you never imagined and saying things you couldn't have imagined saying, because they will naturally come out of your mouth to meet the circumstances or the immediacy of your experience, because you're experiencing it from an inclusive standpoint rather than one that's exclusive to your own truth, your own reality, your own experience. It's natural. And my sense, John, is that when I think an illusion's true, I'm hallucinating. I'm creating. It's a
But what,
delusion.
but what
What's
if
that?
what if the illusion is real?
Well, then it wouldn't be an illusion.
Well, not to say me, but if your illusion is real, it is real for you.
But
And
it
just
wouldn't be an
because
illusion.
I didn't see it, just because I didn't see it doesn't make it not real.
I know, but you're thinking of it in separate relative terms rather than absolute terms. Reality must be real for all of us, regardless of what we think. And regardless of
No, that's not true either, Jack, because people see things that other people don't see, and then they are derided on that for the rest of their life and discounted and considered crazy.
Yeah, but think of that. They're not crazy for seeing what they see. They're crazy for thinking it's real, and other people end up telling them it's not by claiming they're idiots, they're insane.
And what if it is real?
Think of it's only an experience that we're creating in an image. Images aren't reality. They're simply imagination. They're literally illusions. They're literally dreams that we're daydreaming, creating in a brain that's designed to create narratives. There's nothing wrong with that.
But you're discounting tremendous experiences people have had.
No, I'm not. I'm actually giving those experiences credit for being experiences, but they're within the context of reality and truth. They're just things that we're experiencing in relation to the circumstances, and we're doing our best thoughtfully or thoughtlessly to come to a conclusion that makes sense out of it. But when all I do is focus my energy on what I'm thinking and the illusions and imagination, I'm making believe that reality relies on my thoughts and my imagination. And all of a sudden, what is insanity but thinking things that aren't real, seeing things that aren't real and hearing things that don't exist? That's the definition of insanity. That's also the definition of hallucination.
But you're correlating the imaginary with anything that someone sees.
Yes.
Which is not true.
If something exists in reality, we don't need to see it for it to be real. So what we make of it doesn't create reality. It just aligns with reality. So our thinking doesn't need to think of it anymore because now we know it's real. We know it's reality. We know reality.
You're negating the experiences of billions of people over billions of years that have seen things that have seen things that others would say were crazy.
Well, they may be right to make believe that what they saw becomes reality and truth, rather than reality and truth always having been real and true for everyone, everywhere. And what we make of it is a choice. And we're certainly welcome to make choices, but to fight to the death over choices as being reality and truth is to give thinking the throne of reality and truth. And it isn't.
That's very narrow-minded, Jack.
Well, you're starting to see it accurately then.
Very narrow-minded.
Well, if you're seeing it from thinking, I can see what you're saying because you're thinking is so true and real. It must be broad enough to incorporate all other thinking.
Not even thinking, Jack, just visualization.
I know, but those are.
I mean, on one hand, you talk about
people without eyes see.
Yes, but
understanding
on one hand,
is a form of seeing.
Hang on a second. Just on one hand, you talk about things that are ethereal, and the CIA doing things which they were very successful at, by the way, and the Russians primarily before that. And then there's time transfer, and there's things that have happened that others would say are crazy. And there were things that are going on now that others don't talk about, and others would say it was crazy. But the point really is that the reality is different than what most people perceive.
But you're thinking of reality as perception, and perception's a function of thought, not reality. Knowing is not a function of thought. Just imagine, John, just imagine if there's an absolute knowing consciousness, it isn't based in thinking. It isn't based in our eyes seeing. It isn't based on understanding seeing. It isn't based in logic and reason. As a matter of fact, intuition is defined as knowledge beyond reason, meaning thinking isn't involved in it. We know we know. You've had those experiences where you simply know you know. And there's a confidence in that. And there's a peace in that. And there's a knowing what to do in that, not a doubting and an uncertainty which comes with the thinking that we do. It's only beginning to realize that reality and truth is something that is absolute in all respects for all things and all people, everything, all things. And the universe in this conversation becomes small because if it's expanding all the time, it means it's limited. But what would it be limited by to constantly be expanding, but something greater than the limits we imagine it to have?
I totally buy that, Jack. But what I'm saying, and you'd say it's not for sale, I know, but what I'm saying is that there is so much more knowledge out there.
Yes.
That
it's
has
not
been
out there,
hidden.
John. It's right here now.
Let me just finish my sentence.
It's not hidden.
There's so much more knowledge. There's so much more knowledge, Jack, out there that has been hidden.
It's here now. It's not hidden. It's hidden by the preoccupation of what we think is happening out there and we think happened back then, where there is no then and there is no there in the absolute present state of our awareness. None, ever, never has been. That's all a function of making believe we control knowledge because we think of it as something we perceive. And conceding this is actually going to begin to have the fear face that we've been maintaining, the anxiety, the stress, the disorders, the anxious disorders that have undermined all of our bodily functions and minimized our capacity to heal on the basis of things that are diseased because they're discomforting, they're disturbing. They're not at ease because we're creating an internal anguish that we cannot survive and accomplish by constantly adding more and more fuel to it. It's impossible. It's an addiction. And to concede it is to start to say, wow, have I spent my life going so far in a direction I can't achieve, to imagine that the totality of all that present nature is where I am and always been here? And my experience is when people come even close to starting to consider this, they get quieter rather than more insistent. And the thoughts they have become a little more obvious as things they've simply been imagining are truth and reality, and imagining about everybody else. Or think of how clearly we seem to figure out what's wrong with everybody else while we're struggling with our own sense of self-doubt. How right could we be about the wrong we see in others and the wrong we see out there if we can't even come to terms with the absolute wrong we're doing in our own thought process and our own imagination?
Now, all that disgust with others is really, for me, a disgust with myself.
Beautiful. And the self you're disgusted by is nothing more than a thought you have about a thought you have, and it's held by the thought you have right now about who you think you are. That isn't who you are.
And that is the dis-ease.
Very good. So now we're talking about a present state of thinking. And the question is, if that self is only what I think and it's imagined, it's an illusion, and I think it's reality, rather than simply say, it's just a thought. I can have that thought. And everybody out there who has their thoughts, John, are included in this. Every single person in every single way are included in the fact that they are absolutely free to think what they think. And it doesn't turn it into reality. They can think it's their reality, but to think it's their reality is to create an imposition of feeling alone and feeling separate and feeling discounted and feeling depreciated and always needing more from others because nobody ever seems to see them. How can I possibly see someone who's imagining who they are as an insane idea? If I see them, I'm insane looking. I'm insane trying to find them. I am insane trying to uncover it rather than say, it's just a thought. You can have that thought. You're free to it. The impact.
I've used it.
There doesn't seem to be any real problem when we simply concede their thoughts rather than make believe they're true and real. As soon as we cross that threshold, we think we become the creators of truth and reality, and a couple of things happen very quickly. We don't feel we belong where we are, so we always need to think we need to be somewhere else. We seem to be caustically antagonized and offended by other people's thoughts, while at the same time, we become overly concerned about what other people think of us. So at the same time, we're offended by anything that people don't think like us. We're very much committed to having people think about us in ways that align with our thinking. We call those friends very often.
Right. If you're not with us, you'll be all alone. That's the
Or you're an
thread of
enemy.
religion.
Yeah, you're an enemy.
Yeah, you'll be all alone. You'll walk the earth alone if you're not with us.
So this is all self-induced, and the idea that the self we're inducing it by is a thought to be true, rather than simply saying it's a thought. That thought doesn't discount reality, and it doesn't create reality. It's just something we're doing as a human, something we have the capacity of doing. If the capacity of our expression of reality is what thoughts are designed to do, then when we're busy thinking about thinking, trying to create reality, we're busy making believe there is no other reality than what we're thinking. And it's led to all sorts of fractured ideas about what's out there and what people have done and what they need to redo that gives us the impression of impossibility. Why? Because it's impossible to sort out all that insanity, because it's insane and it's simply a delusion being maintained by my own thought that I need to straighten everybody else out, rather than notice I'm not straight to be thinking that at all. I'm not thinking in terms that are honest and true and real.
No, I'm not.
I'll tell you, the fears and the manifestation of those fears become very disturbing when you start looking at them and seeing that the source of it has been our own interaction with the self we thought it was who we are or who we needed to become. And all of a sudden, starting to notice that, it vanishes very quickly, but there's a confrontation that occurs that is very disturbing, because all of the feelings we've been trying to run from and keep from and defend against start to actually become obvious. And to begin to notice that every one of those feelings had nothing to do with all the circumstances we blamed and all the people we used and all the ideas we had and all the cultural norms we thought we were maintaining and that were impossible for us to do anything else start to become obvious. And it's very disturbing to look at that. But the beauty of it is it's kind of like taking the pressure cooker off. The steam gets released and all of a sudden you realize it's just steam built up from the pressure of my own resistance. And the pressure has caused depression from the seeming weight of it, and caused anxiety and caused stress and undermined my bodily health as a result, and my ability to be influential in a way that's constructive and helpful in the broadest way, in the most inclusive way, not in some fractured state where I do a few things for a few people and say, look at me, put my name on that building for having done those things. Like I survive as a result of having, a tattoo on a tree somewhere. Whatever they used to call those carvings. Or people put their initials.
I didn't know there was a word for that.
I think carving in trees, they used to, I forget what they called it, but it was wasn't a tattoo, but I'm always impressed by guys who put their initial on toilet seats and gas stations. Like, what is that?
Or vanity plates.
I was the last asshole here.
Anyway, I have 5 more minutes.
Okay.
David?
Yeah.
This approached some things that I know triggered some things for you, which is part of my purpose. I'm not interested in making believe that half a conversation is helpful, because to me, it just maintains the same craziness that we've all been struggling over. And I want to treat love as something that's inclusive and recognize that being honest doesn't mean slapping people on the back and telling them it's going to be okay, just keep doing what you're doing, when I know that some of that is really killing and undermining them, because I know it does it for me. If I start seeing what's right between us as right, I can start seeing what's wrong between us as something very much a part of what I've been doing, in a way that allows me to appreciate it, not from a spiteful, contemptful standpoint, but a more compassionate, understanding standpoint, where I want to embrace it, and I want to stand in the face of it, and I want to be there at the seeming other end of it, because I'm willing to stand in the face. I don't see it as an assault on my thinking at all. So actually, some of it I do. I still have threads of thoughts in me that I make believe I don't have, and I'm defensive of. And I can feel my tone when it gets a little tight in the conversation. I can feel my tone. It seems to come up into my throat a little bit higher. So there's experiences I have that are witnessing some of the tension and the anxiety. And I would say, John, that's somewhat telepathic to be so aware of it, of others, when I begin to embrace what's happening rather than make believe it's only happening for me and what's happening for them is what's happening for them and I have nothing to do with it. And all of a sudden discount all these other greater awarenesses that are natural between us and constantly available.
I'm not discounting your clairvoyance. I said that before.
Well, I'm not discounting yours or anyone else's. I'm suggesting that it's a natural state of being that we all discount by making believe that what we need to do is continue to repeat the stories that we're telling about things that aren't true.
But I think that there are new stories.
I would say we created 30 or 40 of them today.
No. Yes. And so David, I'll just give you a tool that I've used for years that Jack might be averse to. But when someone does something like lectures me or something, I used to say, you don't know how to be me better than me.
Well, it sounds to me like you're struggling with who to be too.
My next part of it is that I wouldn't say that anymore to anyone.
Oh, yeah.
Because there's so much in there that I'm still not comfortable with.
Well, it is, John, even saying those words give you the impression there's so much in there. So you see it like a bucket of stuff stored with a lid on it, as though it's unavailable. And it's all available and it's all here. And it's only the narratives we create to create these shapes and sizes and forms in our brain that give us this sense that it's real, when all we're manifesting is more illusion and more imagery about it. And the talking about it is the beginning to see that you'll notice things shift because they were never there to begin with. What shifted is your commitment to those thinking processes all of a sudden start to disappear. As they dissipate, as the steam sort of escapes, there's not as much pressure, and you start noticing what feels like a shift because you're experiencing something that you were predetermined or predisposed to not thinking was happening. And that awareness starts to, Jack Kerouac said that the enlightened man realizes he's always been enlightened.
Uh-huh.
So it's speaking to the absolute and saying that acting in delusional terms, acting as though illusions are in fact reality, is making believe that reality exists in form, when in fact form is a possibility of reality. Life forms was what we're living. We're not living life. We're living a product and something built on the essence of life. The possibility of life is what we're witnessing in our bodies. If we can look at that and see it, we're starting to see what sailors saw when they realized the horizon was never able to be achieved. They couldn't possibly fall off of it because the globe was a sphere. And if they approached it, whatever used to be invisible became visible. And what now is invisible is still there. They just haven't seen it. It doesn't make it invisible. It makes it unseen. And to think that our understanding is based on only what we see is to really discount the potential for everything else being there, and to begin to consider that everything is as it is right now, wherever it is, happening as it is with everyone and everything, is to begin to be inclusive in my thinking, to realize that the moment, the presence here now, is already where everything is. I don't need to make anything out of it. And yet I can, and yet I do. And the impact of those decisions are the things I struggle with when I'm wrong in the decisions I make. That's all. Doesn't mean those things out there are any different than they are. Thinking is always changing. Always. Reality doesn't change. The consideration is starting to see that if there is anything absolute, it's an absolute fundamental basis for everything, existence. My sense is We would not have a sense of wrong as clearly as we do if we didn't have an absolute sense of right. It would not occur. Wrong would be our nature, and we would be functioning in it as though we're desperate dogs trying to win the battle all the time, and it would be fulfilling at every turn. And to
Well,
some degree, both of you have fought that fight.
On that note, color me gone.
Love you.
You take care. Bye, David. Is he there?
Yeah. I think he's frozen again.
All right.
David, you might have to, there you are. Okay.
Yeah.
When John dropped, you picked up. So David, I can see in your face that there are some things you're concerned about.
No, actually, you know what? You both defended your truth and discounted mine. And I felt a little bit out of whack today.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because, you know, I agree with a lot of what you say, but I don't agree with everything. Just like it's almost you guys didn't agree with anything I said today, but don't realize that it's my truth. So you have a truth, he has a truth, and I have a truth, but mine got discounted today.
None of those would be true, though, David. None of those would be true.
I know, but it's
you don't know if you're saying that it's yours.
If what we're saying and we're exchanging dialogue.
I'm losing you, David. You might want to turn off your video so your sound can be better, your audio. Can you hear me?
And I don't get a word in edgewise.
David, you're not coming through. Your voice is not coming through.
Yeah, keep listening. I don't know what it is over there.
Can you turn your video off? Just turn your video off. It tends to take a lot of draw from the internet. If the internet's weak.
But I have, I can hear you, but it's going.
There you are. All right, so David fell off, but I expect he'll come back for a minute or in a minute. So for anyone listening, approaching the absolute and beginning to consider things as infinite diminishes anything in a relative basis. So what I said, David, welcome back.
Yeah.
So you might want to turn your video off, and it may be your internet is straining a little bit under the weight. And the video, if you can turn that off. There you go. Okay. So what I said when you fell off, just to the audience, was that whenever the infinite is considered, and I talk about it, David, as reality and truth, because I would suggest that if the basis of existence is the ultimate basis of existence, if that exists, it would be truth and reality, and it would not be dependent on our thinking. Our thinking would be dependent on it. And this reversal of thought is this idea that who we are needs to be defended when who we are is only what we're thinking we are. That's largely all we think about is who we are. It isn't who we are. If the essence of that essence is infinite, the infinite would be the nature of our existence. And to begin
and that's why I fell silent, because I didn't want to defend who I was. And as you say, it's in thought or whatnot. And I just decided to say, you know what? I'll listen for the rest of it, because it almost seemed like a battle between bulls.
Got it.
And I didn't want it to get that way, you know. And it was just like the only thought that I had for the present is, you know, the past is always with us, even though you say it's not. It's just like saying it. I'd never say it's not. I say it's here now. It's the sum total of our present state. Yeah.
And if that's where it is, David, anything that's haunting us from it can be dealt with in the present, not in thinking it's some story made up about the past.
Oh, no, it's not. It's just like saying scars physically, emotionally, or mentally, especially physically, that's the best evidence. They're always going to be with us. It's part of us, and that's what I was trying to express, is that my past is always going to be, it shaped who I was through the pain and the trauma that I went through. And you know that the definition for trauma is something we have no control over, and I've been through that in a very, very painful way.
Do you know what we do have control over, David?
It's how it is now.
Maintaining the trauma, yes.
Yeah.
And making believe that the stories we tell about it are true, when in fact those things have stopped happening. And most of those scars don't reflect any current injury. They reflect an injury that occurred that aren't happening anymore. They may be present. They can be present in thought, but they don't create reality. They don't create truth until we make believe who we are is what we think. And that is a major glitch in human history, to make believe all we are.
Yeah. And then I'm getting these texts now. I got to go to this other little property. The guy wants to come check out the gate. So I have to go over there now.
Okay. So David, I want to pose something to you. I appreciate that when you get to the point where you feel it's a fight, you want to stop talking about it. But some of that conversation, when you talked earlier about not always knowing what to say with the insight you've been getting, part of that conversation comes in beginning to admit the tendency toward the fight is the attempt to maintain something that isn't true. To see that the fight and the defensiveness doesn't come from peace, it doesn't come from knowing, it comes from thinking. And just start noticing the distinction. It's not going to strip you of your history. It's going to give you your history accurately enough to be useful, rather than to be an excuse for why you can't do things and why you aren't who you think you should be. It will free you of that trap by simply making believe that who you are is what you think. And all of a sudden, you can have the freedom to start to see it in ways that you've never actually seen it. And it will come with all of the value of that experience and all of the benefits that can be principled stories today with morals included, rather than immoral stories talking about why you can't do and shouldn't do and aren't doing whatever it is that you may make believe you need to be doing.
Yeah. And I stepped back because I felt like I didn't need to defend.
Okay.
I didn't want to, because, those things tend to go left. And, in my experience. And
just consider in relation to that nobody has their own truth. We just think our thinking is true and real. So we think it's ours. We think we own it.
Yeah.
We think all we become is what we think. That's a big leap in making who we are as reality and truth, rather than saying, I'm already based in reality and truth. Why am I making believe that thinking is my sole source unless I'm thinking I'm the creator of reality and truth?
Yeah.
Just a consideration, something to sort of look at and say, could it be my thinking that's causing all this havoc? Simply defending things that aren't true? And the absolute realization will start to see things in ways that you probably haven't seen them, because they'll become moral because they'll be seen more accurately. And those experiences will become valuable, because one of the greatest things you have is your experience to be able to share in others' benefit, for others' benefit, in beginning to see that what they think is impossible to overcome is absolutely possible to overcome, because we're no longer maintaining it as something that's a fight and a battle. We're starting to simply let it be what it is, which is simply memory, something we remember.
No, true. I agree with you totally on that, wholeheartedly.
Let's focus on that.
Yeah.
Get your work done. Love you.
Yes, sir. Love you too.
Bye.
Bye-bye.